Welcome to the Picks for Pros podcast, brought to you by the Bear Report and Blue Wire Pods. My name, ladies and gentlemen, is Usaid Kosho. I'll be your host for this episode with Andrew out. Before we get into all the action, make sure you're with the NFL Scouting Combine kicking off. Make sure you've liked, reviewed, and subscribed to the podcast wherever you get it. Joining us this week, guys, we've got Pro Football Network's very own NFL draft analyst, Tony Pauline, in the house. How you doing, Tony? Thanks so much for being on here.
I'm okay. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Let's get right into the action. I mean, what do you think are the defining characteristics of this 2022 NFL draft class?
I think you got a lot of the impact or potential impact defensive players at the top of the draft. 30 years ago, before everyone went quarterback crazy and they started reaching for quarterbacks and overdrafting quarterbacks, it was the defensive impact defensive player that was highly coveted at the top of the draft. And that's what you got this year with Aiden Hutchinson and Kayvon Thibodeau and David Ajabu, a lot of those types of players. I think the fact is you got a lot of depth at the offensive tackle position. You got great depth at the tight end position. And I think from a media point of view, it's not a good quarterback class. But I think quarterbacks, for the most part, have been ridiculously overdrafted. But I think when they look at this crop of quarterbacks, especially at the top, there's not a lot of quality at the top. There's not a lot of quantity, after you get past the first 6 or 7 guys.
So you kind of led right into my next question here. We know that there's teams at the top like Detroit and Houston that could possibly be taking quarterbacks, but do you think there's a scenario where you see Kayvon Thibodeau and Aiden Hutchinson possibly go 1 and 2 overall?
I do. I mean, I think Hutchinson doesn't fall farther than 2 because I think Detroit would love to have him, a Michigan grad who with that relentless style. Kayvon Thibodeau, he's a top my boy. I think he's the best player, but I think he's got a lot of questions to answer at the combine. I think they're going to ask him a lot of tough questions. I think you're hearing a lot of negative things about Thibodeau right now, but I believe it's more paralysis by overanalysis versus anything else, because you watch the film and the guy is a relentless pass rusher. He's a relentless defender who makes plays up the field, makes plays in pursuit, shows a lot of athleticism. He's got better versatility than Aiden Hutchinson as far as I'm concerned. He's also more athletic than Aiden Hutchinson.
So, all right, since we're primarily a Bears NFL draft, I have to kind of ask you this. The Bears are going into an offseason where they've only got 5 draft picks, but they do have Justin Fields on the roster. How do you think the Bears approach this draft, knowing that there's a lot of needs? They've got offensive tackle, certainly one to keep an eye on. They need to beef up the offensive line. You look at safety, there's 3 techniques the Bears. So what does Chicago do here with just 5 picks?
Well, I think they go best player available within reason. And I think they're in a good spot because there'll be some good offensive linemen, offensive tackles available to them in day 2 of the draft. So, do they automatically reach for an offensive tackle? I don't think so. But again, if there's a good one there staring them at the face, if there's a good receiver there staring them at the face, I absolutely think that is the position, that is an area where they go. Same thing with cornerback as well.
So are there any of these prospects that you think are going to be ideal fits for Chicago?
As far as day 2 guys are concerned, when you're looking at the tackle class, I like Rasheed Walker a lot. If they want a guy, potentially an upgrade at left tackle, kid from Penn State, I don't know if he's there. I think he'd be great value if he's there. Guy's one of the better pass protectors in this year's draft. Abraham Lucas, the right tackle prospect from Washington State. He's big, he's athletic, can move his feet. He's a dominant run blocker. I think he also fits well somewhere in that round 2 area.
So let's talk the wide receiver class here. We know the cream of the crop is guys like Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Treylon Burks, Drake London from USC. But I also think there's some really intriguing names like a Sky Moore, a Reggie Roberson Jr. that are going to be available on day 2 and 3. What are your overall thoughts about the receiver position?
Yeah, well, I am not as high on Treylon Burks as a lot of other people. I think you're going to see him start to fall. But I think there's no outstanding single great receiver in this year's class. I would agree with you about Garrett Wilson. I like Drake London. I think Chris Olave is really underrated. It kind of falls off after those first 5 or 6. And then you're looking at guys, you mentioned Sky Moore. I like Charleston Rambo of Miami a lot as a 3rd-round pick. I like Wendell Robinson of Kentucky a lot as a 3rd-round pick. Kevin Austin of Notre Dame, I think, is underrated. What's going to happen is when you get in that 3rd, 4th, 5th round area, there's going to be some decent receivers, but you're primarily looking at number threes, maybe guys who can develop into a number two at the next level.
So what are your thoughts on Jahan Datsun from Penn State? Because he, I think, is someone that I think fits the modern day, mold for an NFL receiver. He certainly can play all over the field. And I think he'd be the type of wide receiver the Bears would look to draft to build around Fields.
I have a first-round grade on Datsun. He's not as big as some of the guys like Drake London or Treylon Burks. He's not as super fast as opposed to, say, Chris Olave. He's just a real good receiver. He plays faster than his time. He plays bigger than his size. He knows what's happening on the field. He uses the sidelines well. He runs solid routes. He finds ways to separate, and he's a real good pass catcher. Not a super great athlete, not a super fast guy, but just a real polished receiver who I think is going to be unfortunately downgraded because he's going to probably be under 5'11". I don't think he's going to run the 4.3s, but I think he's NFL ready and a guy that you can slide in right away. Big fan of Datsun.
So let's switch over to the defensive side of the ball here. We know Chicago has Khalil Mack and Robert Quinn. They're making that switch from 3-4 to 4-3. And the most critical piece you could argue is that 3-technique defensive tackle. Who are some names that the Bears need to be keeping an eye on? Because when you look at Eberflus's defense in Indianapolis, the first 2 years it was good. Then when they traded for DeForest Buckner, the entire unit kind of took off as a whole.
If you're looking for a 3-technique guy, day 2 guy, Logan Hall of Houston, someone who had a good senior season, played well at the Senior Bowl, sort of that undersized 280, 285-pound defensive tackle that's quick off the snap, can move exceptionally well. Haskell Garrett is another guy, Ohio State kid, who's going to be a day 3 pick. Again, quick, explosive, and can make plays not only up the field, but can move left or right. Later on in the draft, a guy who I actually like a lot, kid by the name of John Tate out of Memphis, going to be an undrafted free agent. But again, you're looking at a 3-technique type of player.
So, looking at this entire draft class, and, I think draft philosophy certainly plays such a big part into this, because I remember when the 2021 pre-draft process was going on, there was some talk about, these picks are great and all, but those 2022 picks with a normal offseason are going to be more valuable. Despite the fact that this class isn't as strong as what we saw last year, do you still see these picks as being valued as higher with things returning to normal?
Well, I mean, it depends. It's not, it's not as strong at the top, but it's deeper, not because of a normal offseason. It's deeper because you had so many seniors who were eligible for the 2021 draft bypass that draft and take advantage of the NC2 or the opportunity given to them by the NCAA to go back for a second senior season. So what happened was last year you had guys who would have generally been 5th and 6th rounders and then ended up going in the 4th round because of the fact that there was not a great amount of draft picks because most of these guys decided to go back because they either missed the season due to COVID or they played a fraction of the season due to COVID. The Pac-12, some of those teams only played 4 games. So now what happens is this year, even though you do have seniors who have decided to go back, there's many more players in day 3 where you're going to have a situation, guys that are usually 5th round picks or 5th round talent could go 7th round just because of the numbers, and guys that are usually 7th round picks will fall out of the draft because there is a lot of quantity in the late part of the draft.
So we've got the scouting combine kicking off in Indianapolis next week. I mean, what are you looking for specifically at the combine in terms of the quarterback class, knowing that, we're finally going to get a surefire measurement on Kenny Pickett's hands and that these prospects are going to be there and just have the opportunity to kind of work out and test in front of others?
Yeah, I mean, the quarterback workout at the combine is not as important as the quarterback play during Senior Bowl practice. Senior Bowl practice is the kingmaker at the quarterback position. Look at Mac Jones last year when he played great. So, I mean, there are certain things you want to look for. You talk about Kenny Pickett's hand measurement. I was the one who broke that story a week ago at Pro Football Network. I want to see his ball speed. I want to see his ball speed compared to the other guys. Because what happens at the Senior Bowl is, what happens at the combine is oftentimes the quarterbacks throw next to each other. So you'll be able to kind of match up Kenny Pickett's arm strength, say, compared to a Malik Willis or Matt Corral or even a Sam Howell. I want to see if Carson Strong shows any accuracy, any good pass placement. Carson Strong is one of the supreme arm talents that we've seen at the quarterback position, in a long, long time. He can throw the ball, a country mile with ease, but he doesn't make a lot of NFL passes, or he really didn't show the ability to make a lot of NFL-type passes at the Senior Bowl, which was disappointing to me. And then, you got guys like Matt Corral, who I mentioned before, and Caleb Ellaby of Western Michigan, who I like a lot, didn't play in the Senior Bowl. So this is going to be really their first exposure in the pre-draft process to a large group of scouts. Want to see how those guys do. When you're looking at the quarterbacks during the combine, you got to look at the deep outs, those passes that they throw down the field, far out to the hash mark, far out to the sidelines, 30, 40 yards downfield to the right side and the left side. The deep outs, the accuracy in the deep outs, the pass placement in the deep outs, that is the money pass when it comes to combine workouts.
All right, so you mentioned Sam Howell a couple times. Why do you think Sam Howell's kind of slipped? Because going into the 2022 draft, last year, like right after the 2021 draft had concluded, there was people talking about Howell being quarterback one and drawing comps to guys like Baker Mayfield. So what kind of happened to Sam Howell throughout the season that's kind of led to a slide?
He didn't play well. I mean, that's it. He didn't play poorly, but he just was not, he was a better quarterback in 2020 on the field than he was in 2021. I don't agree with the comp to Sam Howell, to Baker Mayfield, because even though Sam Howell ran a lot of design quarterback runs this year at North Carolina, I thought it was to his detriment. He's not a true RPO quarterback. He doesn't have great height. What did he measure in at the Senior Bowl? Barely 6'1". He's a good passer. I thought he was the most consistent passer at the Senior Bowl. He definitely threw some great deep passes, repetition after repetition, where he was dropping it in the receiver's hands in bad weather. But the fact is, he just did not live up to expectations. In fact, I think he really failed to meet expectations last year at North Carolina.
So what do you think is next for Sam Howell? I mean, is he a first-round pick, or is he someone that you see just slip all the way to round 2?
Right now, I think right now I'm looking at 2 first-rounders, and Malik Willis and Matt Corral. Maybe Howell slides into the late part of round 1. Maybe Kenny Pickett, if he has a strong combine workout, he shows good ball speed. Maybe he slides into the late part of round 1. I mean, you could have 3 or 4 quarterbacks selected in the first frame, but I think there's only really 2 guys right now that have true first-round grades.
So what were your thoughts on the Bears hiring Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus? And specifically, Ryan Poles has kind of talked about, I'm going to connect valuation to evaluation. I mean, how do you think that's a breath of fresh air for the Bears, who over the last basically decade developed a reputation for always going ahead and just trading up, being aggressive, overdrafting players, and then not being able to draft and develop?
It's Trubisky, right? You never know until the guy's in the situation. They both have good resumes. They both say the right things. They both had success in their careers in the NFL. But you never really know until it's the general manager there, and he's in the general manager position, and the final decision comes down to him, whether it be in the draft, whether it be signing big time free agents. And it's the same thing with coaches. I mean, now the coach is in charge of everybody, not just the defense, not just the defensive unit. He's in charge of defense, offense, special teams. He's got to run the practice. So on paper, it looks real good, but you never really know until they are actually in the position and they're making general manager decisions or they're making game day decisions.
So what about cornerback for Chicago? Because they drafted Jalen Johnson 2 or 3 years ago. I think that he's certainly developed into a good enough player, and he's cornerback 1 for the Bears. But who do the Bears look to draft here? Who are some names to keep an eye on? Because they got to revamp that entire cornerback room outside of Johnson.
Yeah, you're looking at round 2, maybe Kare Elam of Florida, who I like a lot. I want to see how he runs. I think he's got first-round ball skills. We'll see if he's got first-round athleticism. Round 3, maybe Kyler Gordon of Washington. Mikael Wright of Oregon. I'm not a big fan of his, but I could see him going there. And then later on, a Cam Taylor-Britt of Nebraska, who I think has got a great amount of upside, just needs some proper coaching.
What about Marcus Jones from Houston? Because I know he's 5'8", he's undersized, but I also know that in college he did have experience playing both inside and outside.
5'8", undersized, and he's coming off a shoulder injury. So he's not going to, I don't know when he's going to, shoulder surgery, I believe. So, that is a red flag there. I mean, he is a day 3 guy who I think is a nickel corner at best at the next level. I like him more as a dime back. Coming off a good senior year, really wasn't that highly rated coming into the season, so he's done well and deserves credit for that. That shoulder injury is going to have to be checked out.
Yeah, Jones is someone who I really find to be intriguing, knowing that, Matt Eberflus didn't really the Colts didn't draft a first round defensive back at all in his 4 years in Indianapolis. I mean, the highest guy that they took was Julian Blackmon. But what about strong safety for the Bears? Who are they looking at here to kind of give Eddie Jackson a running mate?
Who are they looking at? I have no idea at this point in time, and I'm not even going to take a stab at that one. Now, who should they consider? I mean, it depends on where they select. I mean, Jalen Petrie at the top of round 2 from Baylor was a terrific college player, played more of a linebacker position than a safety position, did really well at the Senior Bowl in coverage drills, showed that he could stay on the receiver's hip out of breaks, was very fluid in his transition, really impressed me with his ball skills. That's a guy you probably consider at the top of round 2. Round 3, maybe Kirby Joseph of Illinois, who was really taken off, wasn't even graded by scouts coming into the year, had a terrific senior season, had 3 good days of practice at the Senior Bowl, can play free or can play strong safety. He's got a strong safety mentality. But even later on, I mean, Lorenzo Neal of Texas A&M is a big downhill, forceful safety, solid ball skills, tough against the run, doesn't have great lateral speed, but fits that mold of the traditional strong safety type.
So, yeah, I should rephrase my question because I meant to say who should the Bears look at, not specifically like who are they targeting, so that was a big mistake on my part. But, you throughout the offseason, because I follow your work on PFN, you've talked about the possibility of Aaron Rodgers being traded to the Denver Broncos. And certainly you have to connect the dots here. It adds up because you have Nathaniel Hackett, who's there. Then you have Justin Oten, who's the former Packers tight ends coach, now the offensive coordinator in Denver. I mean, do you think that this is something that is a legitimate possibility, with Diana Rossini of ESPN today kind of leaking or tweeting out that Aaron Rodgers' decision's coming soon?
Yeah, it absolutely is. I mean, we've been all over the story of Pro Football Network since January, and it all comes down to Rodgers. It depends on Diane Rossini, tweeting out soon. Aaron Rodgers has consistently said that he's going to make a decision sooner than later. He's not going to leave people waiting. So, I mean, the decision comes down to one of 3 things. He's either going to stay with the Packers, he's going to request a trade, or he could retire. I mean, the last one is a possibility. I wrote that at the end of the Shrine game, after all the articles I had written about him potentially being traded to Denver. The overriding factor in Denver is George Payton, their second-year general manager, really wants him. He wanted him last year. Would have traded for him last year before the draft. So if he's traded, that is an option. And I think whatever team signs Davante Adams in free agency, assuming Davante Adams makes it to free agency and is not franchised by the Green Bay Packers, I think they will have the upper hand in bringing Rodgers in. Rodgers is at a point in his career, people have told me, where he just doesn't want to start over. The Green Bay Packers are in salary cap hell. They're going to have to either restructure a lot of guys, or they're going to have, they're going to have to just cut a lot of guys. And Rodgers doesn't want to be in a situation where he's going to have to start over with new people and really build from the ground up. Excuse me, because he just doesn't have that much time.
Yeah, his window to really continue to win those championships is closing. And I certainly think Denver, just the way that they've drafted over the last couple seasons, in terms of guys like Noah Fant, Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton, and then they have a pretty good defense there. I think that Denver presents overall just the most intriguing situation. But last one before we get you out of here.
And they also have John Elway there. And Elway doesn't matter as far as the coaching on the field, but there's a lot of belief. I heard this last year that Elway will protect Aaron Rodgers, and Aaron Rodgers will have somebody in his corner in John Elway, which I know that Rodgers didn't really feel he had in Green Bay, which is why he made all that noise, a year ago on draft day.
Certainly going to be an intriguing situation to monitor. But last one for you here. knowing the state of the NFC North right now, assuming Aaron Rodgers leaves this offseason, who do you think is the next team in line to kind of be the next team to dominate the division?
Dominate the division? I don't know about that. I guess as far as the Bears are concerned, the Bears are going to live and die by Justin Fields. If Justin Fields continues to improve, takes his game to the next level, I mean, they could be that team. They could be the team that takes over the NFC Central, assuming that, Rodgers moves on.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be intriguing to monitor everything that happens because this division, I think, is going to change a lot over the next couple months here. But Tony, thanks so much for being on. Did you want to go ahead and plug your social media handle for our listeners so they can follow your work?
Yeah, actually, it could change forget about the next couple months. It could change in the next couple of days, depending on what Aaron Rodgers does or his decision forthcoming, the NFC Central. Yeah, you can just follow me at Tony Pauline, TonyPauline. I don't spend a whole lot of time on social media, but we'll have some good stuff next week at the Combine. We'll be there, Pro Football Network, covering it every day. I've been holding some information back and praying that no one else reports it. So that information will be forthcoming real soon.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for being on, Tony. We'd love to do this again, certainly in the future, but we know how busy you are. So, yeah, good luck in Indianapolis next week and have fun with it all.
Thanks for having me.